Assalamu alaikum. It's great to be in a community with everyone over here. And I feel a little almost displaced because I'm speaking about something that I haven't spoken about in a very long time, even though this is part of my active work as well. A lot of people are familiar with me because of my theoretical work, but in practice, this really is grassroots level work that I've been involved in for several years now. I'm a K-8 teacher of 23 years and principal at a Muslim school for 7.5 years. I just retired at the end of January from my principal position, and I'm now leading the high school project for the same school, which is Alhambra Academy in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. And I've been with the school for 13 plus years. On the side, or actually my full-time job is at Northeastern in Boston, where I am in the Graduate School of Education, and I lead the concentration on transformative school leadership. You'll kind of see all of these things. I'm stating this professional positionality because you'll see all of these things interplay in the work that I'm showcasing today. So when I became the principal at the school, and like 8 years ago, we had just become a STEAM certified school at that point, just that very year. And essentially, like, how you get a STEAM certification at least in that area in Massachusetts, is that we have a university, WPI, which is Worcester Polytech Institute. They have an amazing robotics program, amongst other, that's what they're most well known for. But WPI also has a STEM center, which facilitates STEM education in K-12 spaces and with professionals. So anyways, the certification for the STEM certification was with WPI. It involved our team being part of a cohort that was working towards understanding what it meant to be STEM certified or a STEM-centered school. Obviously, you're inquiry-driven, all of those kinds of things that are, fairly well known now. But you can imagine, like, this is 9 years ago. The field was just beginning to emerge. So we were kind of like trailblazers at the point. And certainly, the first Muslim school in New England to have a STEM certification. I believe there's just 2 now that have it in the New England area. So that STEM certification happened, and I became the principal. And now what, right? You have a certification. What does that essentially mean? How is that going to come into practice? Because you've walked away from the certification with a great understanding of what the standards are. In that case, the next generation science standards, NGSS, were just coming up at the point. But then how do you really bring it into practice? How do you involve community, students, teachers, so that it lifts off your documentation and your standards to really something that has practical application? So that's what this is about. It's a special place to be in because it's a Muslim school, and it is a K-8 school, which well, actually, it's not a K-8 school. The presentation is about K-8. We now have our school that goes all the way from infants to grade 8. So there's a whole early childhood piece of it. And then our high school, which I'm leading, is beginning this fall. And that was like, yeah, that's exactly how I feel, because like I retired at the end of January and then started this project, and I was like, that's the busiest retirement I could have imagined, right? It's it was a crazy idea, but I think that maybe next year's presentation will be how to start a high school in 6 months or something like that, because it was like ridiculous, but a lot of good fun. So that's where all of this is situated. Yeah, the research context is, I want us to think a little bit about the evolution of educational approaches, which is to think, like, if you think about, let's talk about the North American context. If you think about education in North America, I often will begin with the question, what lies at the center of education? Like, if I were to ask that question, what is at the center of education? People will have different answers to that depending on the year they're in, pretty much, right? We've seen a popular answer that has, from earlier historical perspectives, is that the teacher is at the center of education. And settings such as this kind of speak that narrative, where there's one person who is the wise sage, the mentor, who is disseminating this knowledge and filling these empty vessels. And when I ask you to imagine a classroom, what is the vision of a classroom that pops up into our mind? When I say, imagine a classroom, okay, what is a classroom that comes into your mind? More often than not, people will think of an elementary school space. They will not think of a higher ed classroom when we say imagine a classroom, right? They'll think of an elementary space, and it is likely that they will think of an elementary space which is forward facing, where the teacher is at the center of education. There's also been this perspective in the United States that the student is at the center of the educational experience. It's all about the student. How are you serving the student? Is the student have sense of belonging? Are the students' lived experiences relevant? Is the study, the work that's happening, is it authentic to and relevant to the students that are there? This is all about the student, right? That's a perspective and an educational approach. I could also put forth that if I ask the question, what is at the center of education? People might not like to say this, but everything points to this, that content is at the center of education. It is all about the content. It is not about the disseminator or the one who is disseminated upon, but it is what is being disseminated. And that's why we are super hung up on standards, for example. We're super hung up on, what is the Common Core saying that we should be doing? Do we have alignment to standards? Are we filling their minds with this? It tends to be content-centered and not so much skill-centered, right? Where we are like, oh, there's all of this information that we have to give them, and we give it to them. And oftentimes when you ask people, what do you do when they're a teacher? They'll be like, oh, I teach math, or I'll teach English, which is kind of unfortunate, because what you do teach are students. But we decenter ourselves when we say, not that I teach students, you say I teach math. So the center is math and not the student. The student just happens to be there, right? And you could also put forth, this idea is very commonly stated, that a lesson is not taught until it's learned, right? Whereas teachers will often, teacher-centric approaches will be like, oh, I taught this lesson, and not care about whether it actually made a difference in anyone's life or not. So depending on, what your paradigm is, you might be really content heavy. You might really think that this is all about what can I pass on. These are all of the things that I need to do. They need to learn X amount of things, what have you. I also argue that education in the United States, if you look at it from a content-centric perspective, and you look at the standards that exist across this nation, the standards are all built for, and the language is explicit, for career readiness. So I would argue that actually what lies at the center of education is career readiness. Everyone is trying to get these kids ready to work. And the education system is centered on a very industrial revolution model, where we talk about students by their date of manufacturing, their date of birth, which determines what batch they're in. We start the school at 8. It's an 8-hour shift, and they're bused to school, and all of that kind of stuff is also happening with them. And I think that's it's incredibly sad, because this educational approach is not one that is preparing students for community readiness, but in fact are talking about career readiness. And therefore we see a complete fall of community building, and rather people are interested in getting a good career out of it, or those types of things. So my pet peeve is that what lies at the center of education is justice. Like that is what the perspective should be, is that all this work is done for the sake of justice. Another important thing to think about is oftentimes when we think of experiential learning or STEM learning, you can think about teacher-centered approaches, student-centered approaches, content or skill-centered approaches. We're really causing a shift to occur when you think experiential learning, because you suddenly begin to talk about the experience. You begin to talk about the skill, and many times you'll think of things that are hands-on, like, oh, we got butterflies and they hatched, or we took them to a field trip and checked the K-8 experience is done. And many times when people are thinking about serious experiential opportunities, they tend to be centered more in the high school experience, which is pre-college. or college readiness, those types of things is when we're thinking about, oh, let's get them an internship or something like that. And we kind of almost infantilize STEM education in K-8 spaces. So that was what I was most interested in. We got super lucky. We got a grant from NNLM that year for a whole bunch of money, and in subsequent years also. And we were able to build an entire experiential learning program, you can call it, around citizen science. That is kind of what I'm working on over here. And I mean, it was that kind of situation where we had this a good amount of money, and we could really go crazy with our dreams and think about it. I do think that we would still be able to do it without the money, because a lot of it was like, we were kind of overspending at that point. But NLM was like super excited about this project because K-8 spaces, little kids like doing dissections and those types of things like sparks a great interest. And we were actually, their team from DC flew up and spent a whole day with us and did a little mini documentary on what STEM education in K-8 spaces looks like. So if you're interested, you can watch that. It's a fun documentary. It's on the school's website as well. So I really truly believe that STEM education, we need a great focus in K-8 spaces, because K-8 spaces, those students are fearless, they're creative, they're curious, right? We all know this. Kids are born into this world, and the younger they are, the more fearless they're going to be to experiment and to find out and to get their hands dirty, and not be afraid of failing if we're not teaching them to be afraid of failing, which happens quite often when you're content-centric. So I think that's a great age. These are their formative years to really push forth for STEM-based education. A lot of you might be familiar. I mean, this holds like, a pioneer in experiential learning conversations, and the learning cycle model is there as a reminder to everyone, providing students with, begin with, maybe it doesn't really have to begin with it, but abstract conceptualization, which would kind of be your content, I think, and then to really pair it with concrete experience, and then be involved in processes that have reflection and observation built in, and of course, active experimentation to go with it. So I'm really quickly going to talk about a first grade example. We did this whole experiential thing with everyone, not just that year. I mean, every year we do it in all our grade levels, but I'm just picking first grade as kind of like a case study. We made this about animal adaptations. It's a pretty well-known NGSS standard in science education. And these were some of the many ways in which we were very intentional about how to build that lesson, so we could steer away from a textbook approach to it, or a worksheet approach to it, or kind of like busy content work. We led the students on bird watching expeditions just in our backyard. I mean, we had, first of all, our older kids were involved in building a trail in the little woods that we have in the back. Like, we'd always told students, don't go in the woods, don't go in the woods. And I was like, why? They should go into the woods. Like, in fact, they should make a trail in the woods so that they know what's there. We did a lot of photojournalism. When we went into the woods, they were taking pictures. And so every grade was involved in something. And the video that I'm talking about really captures all of that. But as a result of that, we were able to take our students on bird watching expeditions. We also tied the same lesson to engineering standards, where these first graders were designing bird feeders, effective bird feeders that wouldn't fall, that would withstand natural disaster, like a little bit of rain, or all of those types of things. So really thinking through the engineering design process, engaging with people in the field, making sure that there was an artistic component to their representation as well, because it is STEAM. And then, of course, tying it all into faith, like tying it all into why is it important as human beings for us to experience the world and bear testimony and witness to, the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and being intentional about observation, because as human beings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pointing us to his ayats, like he's saying, see the signs, there are signs around you, there are signs within you, there are signs before you, and then don't be stupid about the future, because you kind of see all of those things. So this in this you can, I mean, I don't have to walk us through this, but if you look at the learning cycle that I shared earlier, all of the things that we were kind of doing in the classroom were tying back to the learning cycle. So it was really its application to the theoretical framing that COBS has offered us. So, I mean, these are just basic student benefits that you find when you involve young students in experiential learning and hands-on approaches, is they're definitely going to be engaged. Another thing I think that's really important is that you're able to break down complex concepts. And there's a lot of space in there for interdisciplinary learning. There's like writing, there's art, there's math, when they're doing all their design elements. And I think that's super important because we tend, or in the United States, there is this tendency to compartmentalize content areas and subject areas, but nobody lives like that. Like, when you cook a meal, you're not like, I will not think about math and I will just cook. Like, there's no way you can cook a meal without math, right? So building that cross-curricular piece is super important. And then obviously there are larger educational benefits that are just there for everyone. It's fairly simple. These are some challenges and solutions that, those are challenges that I guess everyone is aware of when you think about STEM education or experiential, or like, how do you do it in time? So the solutions that I've listed up there are what was there. It was really important for us to be intentional as school leaders, have buy-in, have a team of people that you're working with, so that we could kind of see its implementation all over the place. I think it's really important to not have hierarchical structures when you're trying to make a school-wide change. So really having all teachers at all grade levels involved and be part of the process and put the ownership on them. Like, how would you like to build this? And then now it's like a super organic process in the school where everyone's just doing it, and there's no checks that we need to put in place. Implementation insights. I think this is hardest for adults to kind of swallow, but yes, embracing failure, super important when it comes to experiential learning, letting the students lead, being okay with noise, providing a clear structure to students, and then ensuring equity, expectations, and accessibility. Like, not everyone is going to be able to do everything. So how are you going to facilitate that sort of thing? And, differentiating effectively is always important. We all know we need to differentiate content, process, and product for our students.